Picture this. You walk into what should be a routine job interview, only to watch the hiring manager's face shift from professional courtesy to barely concealed disgust. The words that follow will haunt you for weeks. We received some very concerning calls about your character, Victoria. Perhaps this position isn't the right fit after all. What you don't know yet is that your own parents orchestrated this humiliation. What they don't know is that you actually own the entire company they just helped destroy your reputation at. My name is Victoria Hayes, and this is the story of how my family's betrayal led to the most satisfying revelation of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Denver. I had my lucky blazer pressed and hanging on my bedroom door, my portfolio organized with fresh copies of my resume and that particular blend of excitement and nervousness that comes with a promising job opportunity. Meridian Technologies had been on my radar for months, not because I needed the work, but because I wanted to understand how the company I'd built from the ground up was actually functioning at the ground level. 3 years earlier, I had founded Meridian under a series of shell corporations and investment partnerships so complex that even I sometimes needed my attorney Helen Rodriguez to walk me through the ownership chain. The decision to remain anonymous wasn't born from ego or some grand master plan. It was survival. Growing up as the daughter of Patricia and Richard Hayes meant learning early that anything I achieved would be scrutinized, diminished, or somehow claimed as a family accomplishment. When my late grandmother's estate settlement provided me with enough capital to start the company, I made a choice that would define my entire adult life. I would succeed completely outside their influence, and they would never know. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was interviewing for a mid-level software development position at my own company. I had spent months crafting a background story that was technically truthful but strategically incomplete. Victoria Hayes, recent graduate with a computer science degree from University of Colorado, some freelance experience looking for her first real corporate opportunity. The resume was thin by design. I wanted to see how Meridian treated entry-level candidates, how the culture I'd envisioned was actually playing out in practice. My apartment in Capitol Hill was modest by choice, furnished with pieces I'd collected over years of living independently. The walls held diplomas and certificates that told a carefully curated story of academic achievement without revealing the full scope of my accomplishments. A few close friends knew about Meridian, but they understood the importance of discretion. To everyone else, including my family, I was simply Victoria, who did some kind of computer work and lived quietly in the city. The interview was scheduled for 10:30 at Meridian's downtown headquarters, a sleek 15-story building I'd helped design but had never actually visited as its owner. I'd seen it countless times in architectural renderings and progress photos, but walking through the lobby as a supposed job candidate felt surreal. The reception area featured the clean lines and warm lighting I'd requested, with living walls of greenery that created an atmosphere of innovation balanced with humanity. Sophie Chen, the receptionist, greeted me with genuine warmth as I signed in on the visitor tablet. She handed me a visitor badge that simply read Victoria Hayes, interview, and directed me to wait in the comfortable seating area near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. I settled into one of the ergonomic chairs I'd specifically chosen for their combination of comfort and professional appearance, watching other employees move through the lobby with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested good morale and clear direction. At exactly 10:25, Janet Morrison appeared from the elevator bank. She was Meridian's director of software development, a woman I'd hired 18 months earlier based on her impressive track record at 2 previous tech companies and her reputation for building inclusive, productive teams. Janet had never seen me before, of course. All her interactions had been through David Kim, my chief financial officer, who served as the face of ownership in most day-to-day operations. Janet's smile was professional but warm, exactly the kind of first impression I hoped Meridian was making with all its candidates. "I'm Janet Morrison, thank you for coming in today." We shook hands and I followed her to the elevator, making the kind of small talk that characterizes these interactions. The weather was typical for October in Denver, crisp and clear. The building was easy to find. Yes, I was excited about the opportunity. All truthful statements, though perhaps not in the way Janet understood them. The interview room was on the 8th floor, a space I'd designated specifically for candidate meetings. It featured a round table rather than the intimidating desk setup that characterized too many corporate interviews, with natural light from windows that offered a view of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Janet had brought Tom Bradley from Human Resources, a detail-oriented man in his 40s who had joined Meridian 8 months earlier after a successful career in HR at several growing companies. The first 20 minutes proceeded exactly as I'd hoped they would. Janet and Tom asked thoughtful questions about my technical background, my problem-solving approach, and my interest in Meridian's mission to create software solutions that genuinely improved people's work lives. I answered honestly, drawing on real experience while carefully avoiding any details that might reveal my deeper connection to the company. Their questions were fair and relevant, the kind that would help them assess both technical competency and cultural fit. Tom was explaining Meridian's benefits package, a comprehensive offering I'd designed to attract and retain top talent, when Janet's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it apologetically. "I'm sorry, I normally wouldn't check this during an interview, but I'm expecting an important call about a project deadline." Her expression shifted as she read whatever message had appeared on her screen. The professional warmth didn't disappear entirely, but it cooled noticeably. She looked at Tom, then back at me, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. "Victoria, I need to step out for just a moment. Tom, could you continue with the benefits overview?" Janet left the room with her phone, and I could hear her voice in the hallway, though not the specific word. Tom continued discussing health insurance and vacation policies, but I sensed his attention was divided. Something had shifted in the room's energy, though I couldn't yet identify what. When Janet returned 5 minutes later, her demeanor had changed completely. The warm professionalism had been replaced by something much more guarded. She sat down and looked at me directly, but not in the engaging way she had earlier. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be completely honest with me. Have you been entirely truthful about your background and experience?" The question caught me off guard, not because I had been dishonest, but because of the sudden shift in tone. "Of course, everything on my resume is accurate." Janet nodded slowly, but I could see she wasn't convinced. "We received a call just now, actually, 2 calls, from people who identified themselves as your parents. They expressed some concerns about your reliability and your tendency to misrepresent your qualifications and achievements." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't process what she was saying. My parents had called Meridian, during my interview, to sabotage my chances of getting a job they didn't even know I was applying for. "I'm sorry," I managed. "Could you repeat that?" Tom leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but professional. "Your mother called about 30 minutes ago. She said she was concerned that you might have exaggerated your experience or education, and that you had a pattern of being unreliable in work situations. Then your father called about 10 minutes later with similar concerns. They both said they felt obligated to reach out because they cared about your future and didn't want you to embarrass yourself or the company." The room felt like it was tilted. I gripped the edge of the table and tried to maintain my composure while my mind raced through the implications. How had they even known about this interview? I hadn't told them about it. I hadn't spoken to either of them in 3 weeks, not since the tense family dinner where they'd spent 2 hours criticizing my lack of direction and suggesting I should consider moving back home to get my life together. "What exactly did they say?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Janet consulted her notes. "Your mother mentioned that you had been terminated from previous positions for attendance issues, and that you sometimes claimed credit for work you hadn't done. Your father said you had a tendency to oversell your abilities, and that employers should verify everything you said very carefully." None of it was true. I had never been terminated from any position, had never had attendance issues, had never claimed false credit for work. But sitting in that conference room, watching 2 professionals I respected wrestle with information that painted me as fundamentally untrustworthy, I realized the truth didn't matter. The damage was already done. "I can provide references," I said quietly. "From professors, from clients, from previous supervisors. None of what they said is accurate." Janet and Tom exchanged a glance that I recognized immediately. It was the look of people trying to be fair while protecting their organization from potential problems. They didn't know me well enough to dismiss the concerns outright, but they were uncomfortable with the situation. "Victoria," Tom said carefully, "this puts us in a difficult position. We don't normally receive calls like this, and frankly, it's unusual for family members to contact potential employers, unless there are serious concerns. Which is why we have to take it seriously," Janet added. "I want to be fair to you and these allegations are concerning. But the fact that both your parents felt compelled to call suggests there might be patterns we should be aware of." I sat there absorbing the full scope of what had just happened. My own parents had deliberately sabotaged a job interview, making false accusations about my character and work history to people who were considering employing me. They had done this without my knowledge, without any understanding of what this opportunity meant to me, and apparently without any concern for how their actions might affect my future. But underneath the hurt and anger, another realization was beginning to surface. They had done this at Meridian Technologies, my company. They had called my employees to spread lies about me, not knowing that every person in this building ultimately worked for me. "I understand your position," I said, standing up slowly, "and I appreciate that you're trying to handle this professionally, but I think we should probably end the interview here." Janet looked relieved, though she tried to hide it. We appreciate you coming in, Victoria. We'll be in touch if we decide to move forward. I shook hands with both of them, collected my portfolio, and walked out of the conference room with as much dignity as I could maintain. The elevator ride to the lobby felt interminable. Sophie smiled at me as I returned my visitor badge, clearly unaware of what had just transpired upstairs. Once I reached the street, I walked 3 blocks before I trusted myself to think clearly. The October air was sharp and clean, a contrast to the suffocating feeling that had settled over me in that conference room. I found myself standing outside a coffee shop in Cherry Creek, staring at my reflection in the window, trying to process what had just happened. They had sabotaged me. My own parents had actively worked to prevent me from getting a job they knew nothing about, at a company they didn't know I owned, based on lies they had fabricated about my character and history. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but it was also clarifying. For years I had told myself that keeping Meridian's secret was about protecting my independence and ensuring my success wasn't attributed to family connection. But sitting on a bench outside that coffee shop, watching Denver's lunchtime crowd flow past, I realized I had been protecting something much more fundamental.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I had been protecting myself from exactly this kind of sabotage. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe Martinez, my best friend since college, and one of the few people who knew the full truth about my situation. How did the interview go? Instead of answering immediately, I called her. Chloe worked as a marketing director for a nonprofit downtown, and I knew she'd be on her lunch break. That bad, she answered, clearly reading my tone. They called Meridian, I said without preamble. During the interview, they told the hiring manager I was unreliable and dishonest. The silence on Chloe's end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. They what? I repeated the story, including Janet and Tom's obvious discomfort and the way the interview had ended. Chloe listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath at several points. Victoria, she said finally, that's not normal family dysfunction. That's active sabotage. How did they even know you were interviewing there? That question had been nagging at me since I left the building. I hadn't mentioned Meridian to anyone in my family. I hadn't posted about it on social media. I hadn't even told them I was job hunting, since they already disapproved of what they saw as my aimless career path. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm going to find out. Chloe was quiet again. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, I said slowly, that it's time they learned who they just tried to destroy. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, staring at documents that told a story my parents had never bothered to learn. Bank statements showing the initial investment that had funded Meridian's startup costs. Incorporation papers listing the complex web of holdings that ultimately led back to me. Tax filings that would have made their heads spin if they'd ever expressed genuine interest in my actual accomplishments, rather than their perception of my failure. The money that started Meridian had come from my maternal grandmother, Elena Hayes, who had passed away 4 years earlier. She had been the one person in my family who consistently believed in my potential, who had encouraged my interest in technology and entrepreneurship when everyone else dismissed it as impractical. Her will had left me a substantial inheritance, but with conditions that kept it tied up in trusts and legal structures that my parents couldn't access or control. They had been furious about the will, not because they needed the money, but because it represented Elena's final judgment about who in the family she trusted with her legacy. The inheritance had given me the freedom to start Meridian without partners or investors who might compromise my vision. It had also given me the ability to remain completely independent from my family's expectations and limitations. Over the 3 years since Meridian's founding, the company had grown from a small consulting firm to a major player in Denver's tech scene. We employed 47 people, had contracts with clients across the country, and had been featured in several business publications as one of Colorado's most promising emerging companies. The financial success had far exceeded my initial projections, but more importantly, we had created the kind of workplace culture I'd always believed was possible. All of this had happened while my parents continued to view me as their disappointing younger child, the one who had failed to follow Brandon's path toward traditional markers of success. My older brother was a financial advisor with a suburban house, a wife, and 2 children. He drove a luxury sedan and belonged to a country club. In my parents' worldview, he represented everything they wanted their children to become. I represented everything they feared: independence that couldn't be controlled, success that couldn't be claimed, and a refusal to seek their approval or guidance. They had spent years trying to convince me that my unconventional path was a mistake, that I should consider more practical career options, that I was wasting my potential on unrealistic dreams. Now they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They had actively tried to prevent me from employment at a company that existed because of my vision, my work, and my grandmother's faith in my abilities. I picked up my phone and scrolled to David Kim's number. As Meridian CFO, David was the closest thing the company had to a public face of ownership. He handled investor relations, major client relationships, and most interactions with employees who needed to speak with senior leadership. He was also one of 3 people who knew my true role in the company. "Hey Victoria," David answered on the second ring. "I heard about the interview today. Janet sent me a summary. I'm sorry it went sideways." "David, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Has anyone in your network, or anyone connected to Meridian, ever encountered my family socially or professionally?" "Not that I'm aware of." "Why?" I explained how my parents had somehow learned about the interview and decided to sabotage it. David listened with growing disbelief. "That's insane," he said finally. "But also, how did they even get Janet's direct number? That's not public information." It was a good question, and one I hadn't considered. Meridian's main number went through Sophie at reception, but my parents had somehow reached Janet directly during the interview. That suggested a level of research and preparation that made their actions seem even more calculated. "I think," I said carefully, "it might be time to have a family conversation, but first I need to understand exactly how deep this goes." David was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to pull the phone records for today. I want to know exactly when those calls came in, what numbers they came from, and how they got Janet's direct line. And David, I think it's time the staff knew who actually owns this company." "Are you sure? You've worked hard to keep that separation." I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built independently, at the success I'd achieved without their knowledge or support. "I'm sure they want to play games with my career. Let's see how they feel when they learn what that career actually is." The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The hurt from yesterday's humiliation had crystallized into something much more focused: determination. I dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without ostentation, and drove to Meridian's offices with a sense of purpose that felt almost ceremonial. Sophie greeted me with the same warm smile as always, but this time she handed me a permanent access badge instead of a visitor sticker. "Mr. Kim said you'd be working with the leadership team today." "Something like that," I said, clipping the badge to my jacket. For the first time in 3 years, it felt good to be officially present in my own building. David met me at the elevator with a folder of documents and an expression that suggested he'd spent most of the night thinking about our conversation. "The phone records are interesting," he said as we rode up to the executive floor. "Both calls came from the same location, your parents' house, but they were made to Janet's direct extension, not the main switchboard. How would they have gotten that number?" "That's where it gets weird. Janet's direct line is only given out to clients, vendors, and internal staff. It's not published anywhere public. Someone had to have insider knowledge." We walked into the conference room that served as Meridian's executive meeting space, a room I'd designed but never officially used. David spread the documents across the polished table, and I sat in what was technically my own chair for the first time. "There's something else," David continued. "I did some discreet checking with our HR database. Victoria Hayes appears on a list of recommended candidates that came through our professional network about 6 weeks ago. Someone specifically suggested we consider you for mid-level development positions." The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't like. "Who made the recommendation?" "It came through Brandon Hayes." "Your brother? He's listed as a professional contact who vouched for your technical skills and work ethic." I stared at David, trying to process this new information. Brandon had recommended me for a position at Meridian, but then our parents had called to sabotage the interview. Either there was some serious miscommunication within my family, or something more complex was happening. "David, I need you to set up a meeting. Today, if possible. I want to speak with Janet and Tom, but this time, I want them to know exactly who they're talking to." He nodded. "What about your parents? Are you going to confront them?" I looked out the conference room windows at the Denver skyline, at the city where I'd built a successful company while my family remained convinced I was failing at life. "Oh, I'm definitely going to confront them," I said. "But first I want to understand exactly how this happened. And I want them to understand exactly what they tried to destroy." The meeting with Janet and Tom was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. I spent the morning in David's office, going through personnel files and company records with the methodical precision of someone preparing for battle. What I discovered painted a disturbing picture that extended far beyond a single sabotaged interview. Helen Rodriguez arrived at noon, her leather briefcase clicking against the marble floor of Meridian's lobby as she made her way to the elevator. As my attorney, Helen had been instrumental in structuring the complex ownership arrangements that kept my identity hidden, but she had also become a trusted advisor whose judgment I valued beyond legal matters. When I'd called her that morning to explain the situation, her response had been immediate and decisive. "Victoria, this isn't just family drama anymore. If they're actively interfering with your business operations, we need to document everything and consider our options carefully." Helen settled into the chair across from David's desk and opened her briefcase with the efficiency of someone who had handled countless corporate crises. "I've been thinking about this since our call. The fact that they knew about the interview, had Janet's direct number, and made coordinated calls suggests a level of planning that goes beyond spontaneous concern." David pulled up the phone logs on his computer screen. "The timing is what bothers me most. The first call from Patricia Hayes came at 10:15, exactly 15 minutes after Victoria's interview started. The second call from Richard Hayes came at 10:25, right when Victoria was discussing her technical background with Janet." I studied the timeline, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with Denver's October weather. They knew exactly when to call for maximum impact. Someone gave them detailed information about the interview schedule. Helen made notes in her legal pad, her pen moving in quick, decisive strokes. "Have you considered the possibility that this wasn't their idea? That someone else might be orchestrating this?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I had been so focused on my parents' betrayal that I hadn't considered they might be acting on someone else's information or instructions. But who would want to sabotage my career, and more importantly, who would have access to Meridian's internal scheduling and contact information? "Brandon," David said quietly, "your brother recommended you for the position 6 weeks ago. He would have had contact with our HR department. He could have accessed the interview details." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Brandon had always been my parents' golden child, the one who followed their prescribed path toward conventional success. But he had also been competitive with me since childhood, unable to accept that his younger sister might achieve something significant without his guidance or approval. But why would Brandon recommend me if he wanted me to fail? Helen looked up from her notes. "Because recommending you gives him plausible deniability. He can claim he was trying to help while simultaneously undermining your chances. It's actually quite sophisticated manipulation." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Brandon had suggested me for the position, knowing it would give him access to interview schedules and contact information. He had then shared that information with our parents, probably framing it as concern for my ability to handle a professional opportunity. They had made the calls, but he had provided the ammunition. "I want to see all communications between Brandon and anyone at Meridian," I said to David. "Every email, every phone call, every text message. And I want to see exactly what he said when he recommended me." David's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had pulled up a series of email exchanges between Brandon and Tom Bradley that stretched back 6 weeks. The first message was innocuous enough. Brandon had written to introduce himself as Victoria Hayes's brother, and to recommend me for potential opportunities at Meridian. He mentioned my computer science background, and described me as talented but sometimes lacking in professional confidence. The phrasing was subtle but damaging, suggesting I had skills but couldn't be trusted to present them effectively. Subsequent emails revealed a pattern of undermining disguised as support. Brandon had volunteered information about my tendency to undervalue herself in professional settings, and suggested that Meridian's managers might need to draw her out during interviews, because she sometimes undersells her abilities. Each message was carefully crafted to sound helpful while actually raising questions about my competence and reliability. The final email, sent just 2 days before my interview, was the most damaging. Brandon had written, "I wanted to follow up on Victoria's interview tomorrow. As her brother, I feel I should mention that she sometimes gets overwhelmed in high-pressure situations. If the interview doesn't go well, it might not reflect her actual capabilities. I just want to make sure you have the full picture." Helen read the message over my shoulder and whistled softly. "He's creating a narrative where any negative information about you seems credible because he's already established that you have performance issues." I stared at the screen, reading Brandon's words again and again. My own brother had spent 6 weeks systematically undermining my credibility with my own company. He had positioned himself as the concerned family member, trying to help his struggling sister, while simultaneously ensuring that any sabotage attempt by our parents would seem legitimate. "There's more," David said grimly. He opened another email thread, this one between Brandon and Janet Morrison. The subject line read, "Additional context about Victoria Hayes." In this message sent the evening before my interview, Brandon had written a longer explanation of his concerns. He described me as brilliant but unpredictable, and suggested that I had a history of leaving projects unfinished when they became challenging. He mentioned that our family was worried about her ability to handle workplace stress, and asked Janet to please be patient with her if she seems nervous or defensive. Each sentence was a masterpiece of subtle character assassination. Brandon had created a framework where any normal interview nerves would seem like evidence of deeper instability, where any attempt to defend myself would appear to confirm his warnings about defensiveness. "He's been planning this for weeks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This wasn't a spontaneous decision to help our parents sabotage me. Brandon orchestrated the entire thing." Helen closed her legal pad and looked at me directly. "Victoria, I need you to think carefully about what you want to do here. We have clear evidence of intentional interference with your business operations by family members who have no legitimate interest in Meridian's hiring decisions. This could constitute harassment, defamation, or even corporate sabotage depending on how we frame it." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had spent 3 years building Meridian in secret, protecting my independence and my success from exactly this kind of family interference. Now that independence was under direct attack, and I had the power to fight back in ways my family couldn't possibly imagine. "Before we make any legal moves, I want to understand the full scope of what they've done. David, I need you to check if Brandon has had any other communications with Meridian employees. I want to know if this is an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern." David's investigation revealed disturbing additional details. Brandon had connected with 3 other Meridian employees on LinkedIn over the past 2 months, all of them in positions where they might encounter me if I were hired. His messages to them had followed the same pattern, introducing himself as my supportive older brother, while subtly raising concerns about my professional reliability. To Marcus Thompson in HR, Brandon had mentioned that I sometimes struggled with authority figures and might need extra guidance during the onboarding process. To a senior developer named Lisa Park, he had suggested that I was very smart but could be sensitive to criticism and might benefit from gentle feedback rather than direct correction. Each message was designed to create low expectations and potential problems before I ever set foot in the building. Brandon had essentially poisoned the well, ensuring that multiple employees would be watching for signs of the instability and unprofessionalism he had warned them about. "He's been building a case against you for months," Helen observed, reading through the messages. "This level of premeditation suggests malicious intent, not family concern." I felt a strange calm settling over me as I absorbed the full scope of Brandon's campaign. The hurt and confusion of the previous day were being replaced by something much more focused, a clear understanding of exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly how to respond. "I want to call a staff meeting for tomorrow morning," I told David. "Full disclosure, I want every employee to understand who owns this company and what's been happening." David looked concerned. "Are you sure? Once you reveal your identity, there's no going back. The dynamic with your family will change permanently." The dynamic already changed when they decided to sabotage my career. I've spent 3 years protecting them from the knowledge of my success. Now it's time for them to learn what that success actually looks like. Helen nodded approvingly. "I think disclosure is the right move, but I want to be present when it happens. If this escalates to legal action, we'll need documented proof of how the revelation affected operations and employee morale." That afternoon's meeting with Janet and Tom took on an entirely different character once I explained who I actually was. Janet's face went through a series of expressions as she processed the information. Confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally a kind of professional mortification that I found oddly reassuring. "You own Meridian?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The person whose family called to warn us about unreliability owns the company. The person whose brother spent 6 weeks undermining her credibility with multiple employees owns the company." I corrected. "The person whose parents called during an interview to spread lies about her work history owns the company." Janet covered her face with her hands. "Victoria, I am so sorry. We had no idea." The way your family presented their concerns seemed so legitimate, so well-intentioned. That's exactly what makes it so insidious. Helen interjected from her position at the conference table. They used the appearance of family concern to mask deliberate sabotage. Most hiring managers would react exactly as you did. I looked at both Janet and Tom, seeing them struggle with the implications of what had happened. They were good people who had been manipulated into participating in my family's campaign against me. Their embarrassment was genuine, but it was also unnecessary. I don't blame either of you for how you handled the situation, I said. You received information that seemed credible from sources who claimed to have my best interests at heart. You made reasonable professional decisions based on that information. Tom shook his head. But we ended the interview. We basically told the owner of the company that she wasn't a good fit for employment. The absurdity of the situation might have been funny under different circumstances. Instead, it served as a perfect illustration of how effectively my family had weaponized their relationships and social positioning against me. What happens now? Janet asked. Do you want us to document this as an HR incident? Should we be concerned about retaliation from your family? Helen answered before I could respond. We'll be documenting everything, yes. As for retaliation, I don't think they're in a position to cause any more damage to Meridian specifically. But Victoria needs to be prepared for escalation in other areas of her life. The meeting ended with Janet and Tom promising complete confidentiality until I decided how to handle the broader revelation of my ownership. They also volunteered to provide detailed statements about the phone calls and their content, information that Helen assured me would be valuable if legal action became necessary. Walking out of that conference room, I felt a shift in my relationship with Meridian itself. For 3 years I had been a ghost in my own company, observing from the shadows while others managed the day-to-day operation. Now for the first time, I was claiming my place as its leader and its creator. David walked with me to the elevator, his expression thoughtful. How are you feeling about tomorrow's staff meeting? I considered the question as we descended to the lobby. Nervous, excited, angry, all at the same time. Any regrets about staying hidden for so long? The lobby buzzed with the usual afternoon energy as employees returned from lunch and visitors waited for appointment. Sophie waved from the reception desk, still treating me like a visitor rather than the person who had designed the space she worked in every day. No regrets, I said finally. The secrecy protected Meridian during its most vulnerable period. It also gave me the chance to see how the company functions when people think I'm not watching. What I've learned is that we built something good here. Something worth protecting. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Littleton for the first time in 2 months. The suburban street looked exactly the same as it had throughout my childhood, well-maintained lawns, 2-car garages, the kind of middle-class stability that my parents viewed as the ultimate measure of success. I sat in my car outside the house for several minutes, gathering my thoughts and my resolve. Through the living room window, I could see the warm glow of lamps and the flicker of what was probably the evening news on television. It looked peaceful and normal, a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty that had emerged from this same house just 24 hours earlier. My mother answered the door with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw my expression. Victoria, honey, what a nice surprise. We weren't expecting you. We need to talk, I said simply. All of us. Is Brandon here? Patricia's smile disappeared entirely. He's in the family room with your father. Victoria, you look upset. Is everything all right? I followed her through the familiar hallway, past family photos that chronicled Brandon's achievements through the years, high school graduation, college graduation, wedding photos, pictures with his children. My own milestones were represented more sparsely, and I noticed for the first time how many of the group photos had been arranged to minimize my presence. Richard and Brandon were watching a baseball game when we entered the family room. Richard muted the television and turned to greet me, but his expression shifted when he saw my face. Victoria, Brandon said, rising from his chair with what looked like genuine pleasure. Good to see you, sis. How did the job interview go yesterday? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I looked at my brother's face, searching for any sign of guilt or awareness, but found only what appeared to be sincere curiosity and concern. It went exactly as you planned, I said quietly. Brandon's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. A moment of calculation perhaps, or recognition that the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. I'm not sure what you mean, he said carefully. I continued, my voice growing stronger, that you spent 6 weeks undermining my credibility with Meridian Technologies staff. I mean that you provided our parents with detailed information about my interview schedule, so they could call it exactly the right moment to maximum damage. I mean that you orchestrated a campaign to sabotage my career opportunities. The silence in the room was complete except for the soft hum of the muted television. Patricia looked confused, glancing between Brandon and me, as if trying to follow a conversation in a foreign language. Richard's expression had hardened into something unreadable. Brandon, Patricia said finally, what is she talking about? My brother sat back down slowly, his casual demeanor replaced by something much more guarded. I recommended Victoria for a position at a good company. I was trying to help her career. By telling them I was unreliable and unprofessional. By warning multiple employees that I had problems with authority and couldn't handle stress. By giving Mom and Dad the hiring manager's direct phone number so they could call during my interview to spread lies about my work history. Brandon's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. I never gave them anyone's phone number. You didn't need to give it to them directly. You gave them enough information about the company and the timing that they could find it themselves. But you knew they would make those calls, didn't you? You were counting on it. Patricia turned to her husband with growing alarm. Richard, did you call this company? Did you say things about Victoria to her potential employer? The expression on my father's face told me everything I needed to know. He had made those calls, but he genuinely believed he had been acting in my best interest based on information Brandon had provided. We were concerned, Richard said slowly. Brandon told us that Victoria might not be ready for this level of responsibility, that the company needed to understand her limitations so they could support her appropriately. I felt a moment of genuine pity for my father. He had been manipulated just as effectively as Janet and Tom had been, convinced that sabotaging my interview was actually a form of help.
What did you tell them, Dad? Word for word, what did you say to the hiring manager? Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I explained that you sometimes exaggerated your qualifications, that you had trouble with reliability in work situations. I told them they should verify everything carefully because you had a tendency to oversell your abilities. None of that is true. Brandon said. Brandon lied. I turned to face my brother directly. Everything you told them was fabricated. I have never been terminated from a job. I have never had attendance problems. I have never exaggerated my qualifications or claimed credit for work I didn't do. You invented a history of professional problems that doesn't exist. Brandon's composure was beginning to crack. Victoria, you're taking this too personally. I was trying to help you succeed by making sure the company had realistic expectations. You were trying to ensure I would fail. That's not. It is true, and we both know it. The question is why? What did you gain by sabotaging my career? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Brandon looked at our parents, then back at me, clearly calculating his response. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone I remembered from childhood arguments when he realized he was losing. Maybe I thought you needed to learn that not every opportunity is just going to be handed to you. Maybe I thought a little reality check would be good for your character development. Handed to me. I stared at him in disbelief. What exactly do you think has been handed to me in my life? You got Grandma's money, he said, the words coming out in a rush. You got her inheritance while the rest of us got nothing, and you've been coasting on that ever since, pretending to have some kind of career while living off her legacy. There it was. The real source of his resentment, the motivation that had driven weeks of careful manipulation and sabotage. Brandon believed I was living off our grandmother's inheritance without earning my own success, and he had decided to punish me for what he saw as undeserved privilege. Is that what you think I've been doing for the past 3 years? Coasting, haven't you? I looked around the family room, at the people who had raised me but had never bothered to learn who I actually was or what I had actually accomplished. They saw only what they expected to see. A daughter who had failed to follow Brandon's path toward conventional success, who was wasting her potential on impractical dreams. No, Brandon, I said quietly. I haven't been coasting, I've been building something. Something you tried to destroy without even knowing what it was. Patricia looked increasingly distressed by the turn the conversation had taken. Victoria, honey, I think you're overreacting. Your brother was trying to help, and your father and I were just concerned about your future. Maybe the phone calls weren't the right approach, but our intentions were good. Mom, you called my potential employer during my interview to tell them I was a liar and had been fired from previous jobs. Dad told them I couldn't be trusted to represent my own qualifications honestly. Those weren't expressions of concern. They were character assassinations. We were trying to protect you from disappointment, Richard said. Brandon explained that this might be too much responsibility for you to handle right now, and we thought it would be better for the company to know that upfront rather than have you struggle and fail publicly. I felt the last threads of my patience snap. Protect me from disappointment by ensuring I would be disappointed. Help me succeed by guaranteeing I would fail. Do you hear yourselves? Victoria, Brandon said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. You're making this much more dramatic than it needs to be. It was one job interview at one company. There will be other opportunities. You're right, I said. There will be other opportunities. But there won't be any more sabotage. Because I'm done pretending that your version of my life has any relationship to reality. I stood up and walked toward the hallway, then stopped and turned back to face them one more time. For the record, the inheritance from Grandma Elena wasn't a gift to coast on. It was seed money for a business that now employs 47 people and generates more revenue in a quarter than Brandon makes in a year. The company you tried to sabotage me with. I own it. I built it. I created every job, every opportunity, every success that organization has achieved. The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia's face had gone completely white. Richard sat frozen in his chair, mouth slightly open. Brandon looked like someone had struck him with a physical blow. Meridian Technologies belongs to me. I continued. The hiring manager you called to complain about my reliability works for me. The HR director you warned about my professionalism reports to me. The company you were so concerned wasn't suitable for my skill level exists, because of my skills, my vision, and my 3 years of 18-hour days, building something meaningful. I paused, letting the information settle in. Tomorrow morning I'm going to tell my employees what happened. I'm going to explain how my own family tried to sabotage my career at my own company. I'm going to show them the emails Brandon sent undermining my credibility, and I'm going to play the recordings of your phone calls spreading lies about my character. Patricia found her voice first. Victoria, surely you wouldn't. I would and I will. Because after years of you treating my career as a failure and my dreams as delusions, I'm done protecting you from the truth about what I've actually accomplished. I walked to the front door, my family trailing behind me in stunned silence. Victoria, wait. Brandon called out as I reached for the doorknob. Can we talk about this? Can we work something out? I turned back one final time. We just did. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian's conference room as I stood before the assembled staff, feeling the weight of 3 years of secrecy about to lift from my shoulders. 47 employees filled every available seat, with some standing along the walls. The energy in the room was curious but relaxed, the kind of atmosphere that accompanies unexpected all-hands meetings that might announce a new client or company milestone. Helen Rodriguez sat at the head table with her recording equipment, documenting what would become either a triumphant revelation or a catastrophic mistake. David Kim had positioned himself near the presentation screen, ready to display the evidence we had compiled over the past 24 hours. Sophie Chen from reception had claimed a front row seat, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by the focused attention of someone who sensed this meeting was more significant than routine business updates. Good morning, everyone, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room despite the nervous flutter in my chest. Thank you for adjusting your schedules on short notice. What I'm about to share with you will fundamentally change how you understand this company and my role in it. I paused, scanning the faces of people I had hired through intermediaries, whose work I had observed from the shadows, whose careers I had shaped without their knowledge. Janet Morrison sat near the middle of the room, her expression still carrying traces of the embarrassment from our previous day's conversation. Tom Bradley had chosen a seat near the back, probably hoping to remain inconspicuous during what he correctly anticipated would be an uncomfortable revelation. My name is Victoria Hayes, and I am the founder and majority owner of Meridian Technologies.
The silence that followed was profound. I watched as the information processed across different faces at different speeds. Some employees looked confused, as if they had misheard. Others showed recognition dawning slowly, like puzzle pieces falling into place. A few, particularly those in senior positions, looked stunned by the implications of what I had just revealed. I understand this is unexpected, I continued. For the past 3 years, I have maintained complete anonymity regarding my ownership of this company. David Kim has served as the public face of leadership, while I operated behind the scenes, making strategic decisions and overseeing operations without direct employee interaction. Marcus Thompson from HR raised his hand tentatively. Victoria, are you saying that all the board meetings we thought were with external investors were actually with you? Not exactly. The board meetings were real, but the investors you met were representatives of holding companies that I control. I was never physically present at those meetings, but every major decision came from my analysis and recommendations. The technical implications began to hit the software development team first. Lisa Park, one of our senior developers, leaned forward in her chair. The architectural decisions for the Morrison project, the ones that came down from ownership last month, those were your specifications. They were. I've been involved in every significant technical decision, every major client relationship, and every strategic direction this company has taken. I know each of your work styles, your strengths, your professional goals, because I've been observing and learning from your contributions. A murmur ran through the room as employees exchanged glances and whispered comments. I could see them mentally reviewing interactions they had attributed to mysterious upper management, realizing that the invisible owner they had wondered about was someone who had been among them all along. Why reveal this now? Asked Sarah Chen, one of our project managers. What changed? I looked at Helen, who nodded encouragingly, then at David, who had the presentation materials ready for display. What changed is that my family decided to interfere with Meridian's operations, in a way that threatened both my personal integrity and this company's professional standards. I'm sharing this information because you deserve to understand what happened, and why it represents a serious breach of trust that affects all of us. David activated the presentation screen, displaying the first of the email exchanges between Brandon and Tom Bradley. The room grew quiet as employees read Brandon's initial recommendation, with its subtle but damaging suggestions about my professional limitations. This email was sent by my brother Brandon Hayes to our HR department 6 weeks ago. As you can see, he recommended me for a mid-level position while simultaneously undermining my credibility with suggestions about my supposed lack of confidence and tendency to undersell my abilities. I advanced to the next slide, showing Brandon's follow-up communications. Over the following weeks, Brandon continued to send emails that positioned him as my concerned older brother, while systematically destroying my professional reputation with multiple employees. Janet Morrison's face had gone pale as she recognized her own name in the email chain. Victoria, I had no idea these communications were undermining you. The way your brother presented his concerns seemed genuine and supportive. That's exactly what made them so effective, Helen interjected from her position at the head table. The manipulation was sophisticated precisely because it appeared to come from a place of family concern, rather than malicious intent. I advanced to the next slide, displaying the timeline of Brandon's communications with various Meridian employees. As you can see, my brother wasn't content to simply recommend me for a position. He reached out to multiple staff members to plant seeds of doubt about my professionalism, my ability to handle criticism, and my capacity to work effectively with authority figures. The room erupted in quiet conversations, as employees recognized their own names in Brandon's networking attempts. Lisa Park looked particularly disturbed, as she read the message warning her that I might be sensitive to criticism and would need gentle feedback rather than direct correction. This is manipulation on a corporate level, Lisa said, her voice carrying a note of anger that I found deeply validating. He was trying to create a hostile work environment before you even started working here. That's correct, but the manipulation went beyond email communications. I nodded to David, who began playing the audio recording of my mother's phone call to Janet Morrison. Patricia Hayes' voice filled the conference room with crystal clarity. I'm calling about Victoria Hayes. She's interviewing with you today,
and I felt I should reach out because I'm concerned about some patterns we've noticed. She has a tendency to exaggerate her qualifications and has had reliability issues in previous work situations. The recording continued with my mother's detailed character assassination, each lie delivered with the concerned tone of a parent trying to protect both her daughter and a potential employer from disappointment. When it finished, the room remained silent for several seconds. That call was made during my interview yesterday, I explained. 15 minutes after the interview began, while I was discussing my technical background with Janet and Tom. My mother had been provided with detailed scheduling information that allowed her to time the call for maximum disruptive impact. David played the second recording, my father's voice adding weight to the false narrative about my professional shortcomings. Richard Hayes sounded earnest and worried as he warned Janet about my supposed tendency to oversell my abilities, and suggested that all my claims should be verified carefully. When the second recording ended, Tom Bradley spoke up from his position near the back of the room. Victoria, Janet and I ended that interview based on those phone calls. We essentially told the owner of our company that she wasn't suitable for employment. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. A few people laughed nervously, but most looked stunned by the implications of what they were hearing. The phone calls were coordinated, I continued. My parents didn't independently decide to contact Meridian during my interview. They were acting on information provided by Brandon, who had spent weeks positioning himself as my concerned advocate, while actually orchestrating my professional destruction. I advanced to the final slide, showing the complete timeline of events from Brandon's initial recommendation through the sabotaged interview. This represents a systematic campaign to undermine my credibility with my own company, executed by family members who had no legitimate business interest in Meridian's hiring decisions. Helen stood up from her position at the head table. From a legal perspective, what we're looking at here constitutes several potential violations: harassment, defamation, interference with business operations, and possibly corporate sabotage. The coordinated nature of the campaign and the deliberate timing of the disruptions suggest malicious intent rather than misguided family concern. Marcus Thompson raised his hand again. What does this mean for us, for the company? Are we going to face retaliation from your family? It was a reasonable question that I had been considering since the revelation began. Meridian Technologies is legally protected from any direct retaliation by my family members. They have no ownership stake, no business relationship with the company, and no legitimate grounds for interference with our operations. However, I want everyone to understand that my decision to reveal my ownership status changes the dynamic of how this company operates. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many employees as possible. For 3 years, you've all been working for a company where the owner was invisible, where decisions came through intermediaries, where leadership seemed distant and impersonal. That changes today. I'm stepping into a direct leadership role, which means you'll be working with me rather than wondering about mysterious ownership decisions. The questions came rapidly after that. Employees wanted to know about company direction, about their job security, about how the revelation would affect client relationships and business operations. I answered each query with the kind of detailed knowledge that only comes from intimate involvement in every aspect of a business. Will this affect our contracts with current clients? Asked one of the account managers. Our client relationships are based on the quality of our work and the strength of our service delivery, not on the personal identity of ownership. I don't anticipate any negative impact from this revelation, and several clients have been asking to meet with ownership for months. Now they can. What about expansion plans? Will you be more involved in strategic decisions going forward? I've been involved in every strategic decision since the company's founding. What changes is that I'll be making those decisions transparently, rather than through intermediaries. I expect this will actually improve our ability to respond quickly to opportunities and challenges. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours, as employees processed the information and asked follow-up questions. The initial shock gradually gave way to curiosity, then to what seemed like genuine excitement about working directly with the person who had built the company they had come to respect. As the formal meeting concluded, and employees began to return to their regular responsibilities, Janet Morrison approached me with an expression of profound regret. Victoria, I need to apologize again for how we handled yesterday's interview. If I had known, Janet, you handled the situation exactly as any responsible hiring manager would. You received information that seemed credible from sources who appeared to have legitimate concerns. You made professional decisions based on that information. The failure wasn't yours, it was my family's. But we judged you based on false information. We ended an interview with the company's owner because we believed lies about her character, which is exactly why what they did was so damaging. They didn't just hurt me personally, they compromised this company's ability to make sound business decisions. They turned dedicated employees into unwitting participants in sabotage. Tom Bradley joined our conversation, looking equally troubled by the implications. How do we prevent something like this from happening again? What if they try to interfere with other aspects of the business? Helen answered before I could respond. We're implementing several protective measures immediately. All external communications about personnel matters will be documented and verified. Any unsolicited contact from family members of employees will be flagged for review. And we're establishing clear protocols for handling third-party information about current or potential staff. The legal protections were important, but they didn't address the deeper issue of trust that had been damaged by my family's actions. Several employees expressed concern about whether they could rely on information from external sources, whether personal relationships might be used to manipulate business decisions, whether the company culture of openness and collaboration might be compromised by the need for defensive measures. I understand your concerns. I told the group that had gathered around me after the formal meeting ended. What happened yesterday represents a betrayal of trust that extends beyond my personal relationship with my family. It threatened the integrity of our hiring process, compromised our professional standards, and put all of you in the position of making decisions based on deliberately false information. I paused, looking at each face in turn. But I want you to understand something important. What happened also revealed the strength of this company's culture and values. Janet and Tom handled the situation professionally even when they were being manipulated. Every employee who interacted with Brandon maintained appropriate boundaries and followed proper protocols. The sabotage failed not because my family was incompetent, but because you all were competent. The afternoon brought a steady stream of individual conversations, as employees stopped by my temporary office to discuss the implications of the revelation. Some wanted reassurance about job security, others had questions about company direction, and a few simply wanted to express their support for my decision to reveal the truth about what had happened. Lisa Park arrived around 3 o'clock with a folder of printed emails, an expression of barely contained anger. Victoria, I've been going through my communications with your brother, and I'm furious about what he did. He didn't just undermine you. He wasted my time and emotional energy on fake concerns about a coworker who didn't actually need help. She spread the printed emails across my desk, pointing to specific phrases that had bothered her even before she understood their true purpose.
Look at this. Victoria is very smart but could be sensitive to criticism. That made me worry about how to approach code reviews with you. I spent time developing strategies for giving feedback gently when you probably would have preferred direct, honest technical assessments. The personal impact of Brandon's manipulation was becoming clearer as more employees shared their experiences. He had not only tried to damage my reputation, he had corrupted their professional relationships with a coworker they had never actually met. Multiple staff members had modified their communication styles, adjusted their expectations, and prepared for interpersonal challenges that existed only in Brandon's fabricated narrative. This is what makes the sabotage so insidious, Helen observed, when I shared these conversations with her later that afternoon. It didn't just target you, it poisoned the professional environment for everyone who might have worked with you. Brandon created a web of false expectations that would have made normal workplace interactions much more difficult. The revelation of my ownership had also triggered practical considerations that needed immediate attention. David and I spent several hours updating corporate documents, revising signatory authorities, and establishing new protocols for decision-making that reflected my direct involvement rather than shadow leadership. There's something liberating about this, David admitted as we worked through the organizational changes. For 3 years, I've been fielding questions about ownership decisions and strategic direction with carefully crafted non-answers. Now I can simply say you'll need to discuss that with Victoria's and actually mean it. The client implications were more complex.
Meridian had built relationships with several major accounts based on David's representation of ownership interests and strategic vision. Now those clients would learn that their primary contact had been speaking for a 28-year-old woman they had never met, rather than the established business consortium they had imagined. Some clients are going to be surprised, I acknowledged. But our work speaks for itself. The projects we've delivered, the innovations we've implemented, the service quality we've maintained, none of that changes because they now know who was actually making the decisions behind the scenes. Helen was more cautious about potential client reactions. You need to be prepared for some pushback, particularly from more traditional organizations. Some clients may question whether they want to work with such a young owner, regardless of your track record. Then they weren't the right clients for us anyway, I replied. I'd rather work with organizations that judge us on our results than ones that make decisions based on assumptions about age or gender. As the workday ended, I found myself standing in my office, my actual office for the first time, looking out at the Denver skyline and feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The weight of secrecy was gone, replaced by the responsibility of visible leadership. The protection of anonymity had been exchanged for the vulnerability of direct accountability. My phone buzzed with a text message from Chloe Martinez. Heard through the grapevine that you made some kind of announcement at work today. Everything okay? I called her back immediately. More than okay. I told my staff that I own Meridian. The silence on Chloe's end lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. You what? I explained the day's events, from the staff meeting through the individual conversations and the practical implications of no longer operating in secret. Chloe listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath at several points. Victoria, this is huge. You've been planning this company's structure around secrecy for 3 years. You're essentially rebuilding your entire professional identity in a single day. I know, but keeping the secret was protecting my family from the consequences of their own ignorance. After what they did yesterday, I realized I was sacrificing my own professional development to shield them from knowledge they should have had all along. How are you feeling about the decision? I considered the question carefully, scared, excited, angry, relieved all at the same time. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some catastrophic consequence I haven't anticipated. What about your family? Have you heard from them since last night? I checked my phone for missed calls or messages. Nothing from my parents or Brandon since I had left their house the previous evening. Radio silence, which is probably for the best right now. I need time to process everything that's happened before I'm ready for whatever their response is going to be. Chloe was quiet for a moment. You know they're going to be furious when they realize what you've accomplished. Brandon especially, he spent all that energy trying to sabotage what he thought was a minor career opportunity, and it turns out he was attacking a successful business owner. Good, let them be furious. I'm done protecting their feelings at the expense of my own success. That evening, I stopped by Helen's office to review the legal documentation we had prepared throughout the day. Her law firm occupied several floors of a downtown building, with conference rooms that offered panoramic views of the city and the mountains beyond. I've been thinking about next steps, Helen said, as we settled into her office with coffee and a stack of legal folders. Your family's interference with Meridian's operations gives us several potential avenues for legal action, but I want to make sure you understand the implications before we proceed. She spread several documents across her desk, each representing a different approach to addressing the sabotage and preventing future interference. We could pursue a harassment case based on the coordinated nature of their actions and the deliberate timing of the disruptions. We could file defamation claims based on the false statements about your professional history. We could seek restraining orders to prevent future contact with Meridian employees. I studied the legal options, weighing the satisfaction of formal consequences against the reality of ongoing family relationships. What about the corporate sabotage angle? Brandon's interference with business operations. That's more complex because he didn't actually access proprietary information or cause direct financial damage. His manipulation was subtle enough that proving malicious intent might be challenging, even though we both know it was deliberate. Helen leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What do you actually want to achieve here? Punishment for what they did. Protection from future interference. Public vindication. Legal precedent. The question forced me to examine my motivations more deeply than I had since the crisis began. Was I seeking justice, revenge, protection, or simply acknowledgement of the harm that had been done? I want them to understand the consequences of their actions, I said finally. I want them to realize that their attempt to sabotage my career actually targeted a successful business that employs dozens of people and serves clients across the country. I want them to confront the reality that their ignorance and manipulation had implications far beyond their intended target. And after they understand those consequences, what then? I looked out Helen's office windows at the lights beginning to twinkle across Denver's business district. Somewhere in that landscape was Meridian's building, where tomorrow my employees would continue working on projects that existed because I had chosen to build something meaningful rather than seek my family's approval. Then I want to be free to run my company without worrying about their interference. I want to build Meridian into everything I envisioned without having to hide my success or protect them from their own ignorance. Helen nodded approvingly. Those are achievable goals, and they don't necessarily require aggressive legal action. Sometimes the most effective response to sabotage is simply the demonstration of what they tried to destroy. She gathered the legal documents into neat stacks, then looked at me directly. Victoria, your family tried to sabotage a job interview. What they actually sabotaged was their own relationship with a successful business owner who could have been an asset to their social and professional networks. The loss is theirs, not yours. As I drove home through the evening traffic, I reflected on how dramatically the landscape of my life had changed in just 2 days. On Tuesday morning, I had been Victoria Hayes, the disappointing daughter who lived quietly in the city and did some kind of computer work. By Thursday evening, I was Victoria Hayes, founder and owner of one of Denver's most promising technology companies, with legal representation and a staff of 47 people who now knew exactly who they were working for. The change felt seismic, but also somehow inevitable. The secrecy that had protected Meridian during its vulnerable early years had outlived its usefulness. The family relationships that I had tried to preserve through careful omission had been poisoned by manipulation and sabotage that rendered continued protection pointless. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. The caller ID showed Brandon's name. I stared at the screen for several rings, then answered. Hello, Brandon. Victoria, we need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out of hand, and I think there are some misunderstandings that need to be cleared up. What misunderstandings would those be? I think you're attributing malicious motives to actions that were genuinely intended to help you. Mom and Dad are devastated that you think they were trying to hurt you. They're worried that you're not thinking clearly about the consequences of whatever you're planning to do. I parked my car and sat in the silence for a moment, listening to my brother attempt to manage a crisis that was spiraling beyond his control. Brandon, are you calling to apologize for spending 6 weeks undermining my credibility with multiple employees at Meridian Technologies? I'm calling to suggest that we have a family conversation about how to move forward in a way that doesn't damage relationships that took years to build. Those relationships were damaged when you decided to sabotage my... They were destroyed when Mom and Dad called my potential employer to spread lies about my professional history. I didn't create this crisis, I'm simply no longer willing to pretend it didn't happen. Victoria, you own a company. We get that now. But do you really want to destroy your family over a misunderstanding about a job interview? The audacity of the question took my breath away. Brandon was still trying to minimize the scope of what he had orchestrated, still attempting to frame calculated sabotage as a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with family diplomacy. I'm not destroying anything, I said quietly. I'm simply no longer protecting you from the consequences of your own actions. Tomorrow my employees will know exactly what you tried to do to their company and their colleague. Next week my clients will learn that the successful business they've been working with belongs to the person whose family tried to sabotage her career. The story will speak for itself. And what about us? What about our relationship? I looked up at my apartment building, at the life I had built independently of their expectations and limitations. What relationship, Brandon? The one where you pretend to support me while systematically undermining my credibility. The one where you manipulate our parents into sabotaging opportunities they don't understand. The one where you treat my professional life as a source of entertainment and my success as a threat to your own status. That's not fair. It's completely fair. And it's over. I ended the call and turned off my phone, then sat in my car for several more minutes, letting the full weight of the day settle around me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as clients learned about the ownership revelation, as employees adjusted to working directly with me rather than through intermediaries, as the story of the sabotage inevitably spread through Denver's business community. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely free to be exactly who I was. Victoria Hayes, successful entrepreneur, company owner, and someone who had finally stopped apologizing for accomplishments her family refused to acknowledge. The apartment felt different when I walked through the door. The same furniture, the same layout, the same view from the windows, but somehow the space itself had been transformed by the day's revelations. This wasn't just the modest home of someone doing computer work anymore. This was the residence of a business owner who employed nearly 50 people and had built something meaningful from nothing more than vision and determination. I poured a glass of wine and settled onto my couch with my laptop, reviewing the emails and messages that had accumulated throughout the day. Several clients had already reached out requesting meetings to discuss the ownership revelation. 2 potential clients had expressed renewed interest in working with Meridian now that they could meet directly with the decision maker. A local business journal had left a voicemail requesting an interview about young entrepreneurs in Denver's tech scene. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but I knew the real test would come in the following weeks as the implications of my revealed ownership rippled through the broader business community. Some clients would undoubtedly question whether they wanted to work with such a young owner. Some competitors would look for ways to use the family drama against Meridian's reputation. Some industry contacts would reassess their relationships based on this new information. But as I read through messages of support from employees, expressions of interest from potential clients, and congratulations from business contacts who had wondered about Meridian's mysterious ownership structure, I realized that the benefits of transparency far outweighed the risks of continued secrecy. The doorbell rang at 9:30, interrupting my review of the day's correspondence. I looked through the peephole to see Chloe standing in the hallway with a bottle of champagne and a broad smile. "I figured tonight called for a celebration," she said when I opened the door. "You just had the most spectacular coming out as a successful entrepreneur day in the history of corporate revelations." We opened the champagne and settled onto the couch, rehashing the day's events and speculating about what the next few weeks would bring. "I still can't believe Brandon thought he was clever enough to manipulate a situation involving a company he knew nothing about," Chloe said, shaking her head in amazement. "The arrogance is breathtaking. He's never had to consider the possibility that I might be successful on my own terms rather than by his standards.
Oh!
In his worldview, I'm still the little sister who needs guidance and protection from making embarrassing mistakes. Well, he's about to learn otherwise. I have a feeling this story is going to spread through Denver's business community pretty quickly." Chloe was right. The next morning brought a flood of phone calls, emails, and messages as word of the revelation spread through professional networks and social media. The story had all the elements that business gossip thrives on: family drama, corporate sabotage, hidden ownership, and a satisfying reversal where the victim turned out to hold all the power. By noon I had received interview requests from 3 business publications, invitations to speak at 2 entrepreneurship conferences, and inquiries from a dozen potential clients who wanted to work directly with Meridian's previously mysterious owner. The attention was flattering but also overwhelming. I had spent 3 years carefully managing information about my role in Meridian's success. Now that information was spreading faster than I could control or direct it. Helen called around lunchtime with updates on the legal implications of the increased visibility. "Victoria, you need to be prepared for the possibility that your family might escalate their response as this story gains traction. Success stories about young entrepreneurs get attention, and attention might motivate them to try more aggressive interference. What kind of escalation are you thinking about? They might try to challenge your ownership claims, suggest that you're exaggerating your role in the company's success, or attempt to damage your reputation through their own social and professional networks. Brandon especially might feel cornered and reactive." The warning proved prescient. That afternoon, David received a call from someone claiming to represent concerned investors who wanted to verify the ownership claims that were circulating in local business news. The caller asked detailed questions about corporate structure, asked for documentation of my role in major decisions, and suggested that there might be discrepancies between public statements and actual ownership arrangements. It was obviously a fishing expedition, David told me during an emergency meeting in his office. Whoever called knew enough about corporate structure to ask intelligent questions, but not enough about our actual arrangements to understand that everything is completely legitimate and documented. Helen's suspicions proved correct when we traced the call back to a business attorney who had been retained by Richard Hayes earlier that morning. My father was apparently attempting to verify whether my ownership claims were accurate, possibly hoping to find evidence that I was exaggerating my role in Meridian's success. They're still trying to sabotage you, Helen observed when we reviewed the phone records. Even after learning that you own the company, they're looking for ways to undermine your credibility or challenge your accomplishments. The realization was both infuriating and clarifying. My family's response to learning about my success hadn't been pride, celebration, or even simple acknowledgement. Their response had been to immediately begin investigating whether that success was real and whether they could find ways to diminish or discredit it. We need to end this, I told Helen. Not just for my sake but for Meridian's. I can't run a company while constantly defending my ownership from sabotage by my own family. Helen nodded grimly. I think it's time for more direct legal intervention. They've escalated from personal sabotage to corporate harassment. That crosses several lines that we can't allow them to continue crossing. As I drove home that evening through the familiar streets of Capitol Hill, I reflected on how quickly and dramatically the landscape of my life had changed. 3 days earlier, I had been living quietly under the radar, protecting my success from family interference through careful secrecy. Now I was the visible owner of a growing company, dealing with business press attention and preparing for legal action against family members who couldn't accept the reality of my accomplishments. The transformation felt both terrifying and liberating. The secrecy was gone, but so was the constant stress of maintaining dual identities. The protection was gone, but so was the isolation of hiding my achievements from the people who should have been celebrating them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the article in Denver Business Journal. Congratulations on your success. Some of us always knew you were destined for something special. Elena's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. I smiled as I read the message, remembering my grandmother's elderly neighbor who had always treated me with kindness and respect during family visits. The fact that she had connected my current success with Elena's belief in my potential felt like a validation that transcended the immediate crisis with my parents and Brandon. Another message arrived as I parked in front of my building. Victoria, this is incredible. I had no idea my old study partner was running one of Denver's hottest tech companies. We need to catch up soon. Sarah from University of Colorado CS program. The evening brought a steady stream of congratulations from college friends, former professors, and professional contacts who were learning about my role in Meridian's success. Each message represented a relationship that had been artificially constrained by my decision to keep the company secret, connections that could now develop naturally without the barriers I had maintained to protect my family's ignorance. As I settled into my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, I realized that the day's challenges had been accompanied by an unexpected gift, the ability to be completely honest about my life and accomplishments for the first time in 3 years. The stress of managing dual identities was gone, replaced by the simpler challenge of dealing with success openly and directly. My laptop chimed with a new email from Janet Morrison, sent after business hours with a subject line that read, "Thank you. Victoria," the message began. I wanted to reach out after today's meetings to express how grateful I am to be working for someone who handled such a difficult situation with such grace and professionalism. Learning about your ownership of Meridian recontextualized everything I thought I knew about this company's leadership and values. The way you protected all of us from the knowledge of your family's sabotage while still ensuring we had all the information we needed to do our jobs effectively shows a level of thoughtfulness and consideration that makes me proud to be part of this team. Thank you for trusting us with the truth, and thank you for building a company that represents the best of what workplace culture can be. I read the message twice, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the Thai curry I was eating. Janet's words captured something I hadn't been able to articulate about the day's revelations. The staff meeting hadn't just been about revealing my ownership or explaining my family's sabotage. It had been about finally trusting my employees with the complete truth about the company they had chosen to build their careers around. The trust had been reciprocated. Instead of feeling betrayed by the secrecy or concerned about the implications of family drama, my staff had rallied around the revelation with support, curiosity, and renewed commitment to Meridian's mission. They had seen past the unusual circumstances to recognize that the company they had respected was now being led by someone they could work with directly rather than through intermediaries. As I prepared for bed, I checked my phone one final time for any emergency business communications. Instead, I found a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The message was brief but significant. "Miss
Hayes, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates Public Relations. We specialize in crisis communication and reputation management for emerging businesses. We've been following the story about your company and your family situation, and we'd like to discuss how we might help you manage the narrative going forward. Some of our clients have faced similar challenges with family interference in professional settings, and we've developed effective strategies for protecting business interests while maintaining personal boundaries. Please call when you have a chance to discuss your needs. The message was a reminder that my situation, while personally devastating, wasn't unique in the business world. Other entrepreneurs had faced family sabotage. Other successful individuals had dealt with relatives who couldn't accept their achievements. Other business owners had been forced to choose between family harmony and professional integrity. The difference was that I now had the resources and legal standing to address the interference effectively rather than simply enduring it. Meridian's success provided options that I wouldn't have had as an entry-level employee hoping for family support rather than family sabotage. I turned off the lights and settled into bed, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized by the day's events. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the story continued to spread, and my family developed their response to my refusal to protect them from the consequences of their actions. But tonight, for the first time in years, I fell asleep without the weight of maintaining elaborate secrecy about the most important accomplishment of my life. The truth was finally out, in all its messy complexity, and I was free to deal with whatever came next as exactly who I was. Victoria Hayes, successful entrepreneur, target of family sabotage, and someone who had finally stopped apologizing for refusing to fail on other people's terms. The Denver Business Journal article appeared on Friday morning with a headline that made my coffee taste bitter: Local tech entrepreneur faces family sabotage after revealing company ownership. The accompanying photo showed Meridian's downtown headquarters, with an inset image of me from our company website that I had never approved for public use. Helen Rodriguez called before 8 a.m., her voice tight with professional concern. "Victoria, we have a problem." The article includes quotes from someone identified as a family member who wished to remain anonymous, questioning the timeline of your ownership claims and suggesting that you may be overstating your role in Meridian's early development. I pulled up the article on my laptop, scanning past the factual reporting about the sabotaged interview until I found the damaging section. The anonymous source suggested that I had inherited a business opportunity rather than created one, and questioned whether someone with limited professional experience could realistically have built such a complex organization without significant behind-the-scenes assistance. The quotes were carefully crafted to plant doubt without making specific accusations that could be legally challenged. They suggested incompetence without claiming fraud, questioned my capabilities without denying my ownership, and painted my success as potentially unearned without providing evidence for that assertion. "This is Brandon," I told Helen. "The phrasing is exactly like his email campaign. He's escalating to media manipulation. The timing is also suspicious." This article was pitched to the Business Journal yesterday afternoon, less than 24 hours after your staff revelation. Someone wanted to get ahead of the positive coverage and control the narrative. I scrolled through the rest of the article, which included balanced reporting about Meridian's growth, quotes from employees praising the company culture, and acknowledgement of my technical background and business achievements. But the anonymous family members' quotes created an undertone of doubt that colored the entire piece. "What are our options for response?" Helen was quiet for a moment, probably reviewing legal strategies. "We could demand a retraction based on the unsubstantiated nature of the claims, but that might draw more attention to the allegations. We could provide detailed documentation of your role in the company's founding and development, but that rewards the sabotage attempt by forcing you to defend yourself publicly. Or we could let your business results speak for themselves and focus on preventing future interference." The choice felt like a test of everything I had learned about leadership and crisis management over the past 3 years. Responding defensively would validate my family's strategy of forcing me to justify my accomplishments. Ignoring the allegations might allow doubt to spread through potential client and investor communities. But addressing the situation proactively with evidence and context might demonstrate exactly the kind of thoughtful leadership that Meridian's reputation was built on. "I want to hold a press conference," I decided. "Monday morning, 10 a.m., in Meridian's main conference room. I want to present the full documentation of the company's founding, growth, and my role in major decisions. I want clients, employees, and media to see exactly what my family tried to sabotage and exactly what they're continuing to try to undermine." Helen's approval was immediate. "That's the right approach. Transparent, documented, proactive rather than defensive. We'll need the weekend to prepare comprehensive materials, but a well-executed press conference will establish the authoritative narrative about both Meridian's success and your family's interference." The morning brought a series of phone calls from clients who had read the Business Journal article and wanted clarification about the ownership questions it raised. Most were supportive, expressing confidence in Meridian's track record regardless of family drama, but their need for reassurance highlighted how effectively the anonymous quotes had introduced uncertainty into previously solid business relationships. Marcus Thompson from HR stopped by my office around 10 with a stack of printed articles and a concerned expression. Victoria, this story is spreading faster than we anticipated. It's been picked up by 3 Colorado business publications and 2 national entrepreneur blogs. The family angle is getting more attention than the business success angle. I reviewed the various articles, noting how each publication had emphasized different aspects of the story. Some focused on the corporate sabotage angle, others on family dysfunction in business settings, and a few on young entrepreneurs facing unusual challenges. But all of them included variations of the anonymous family members' quotes questioning my qualifications and role in Meridian's development. The consistency is suspicious, Marcus observed. Either one family member is talking to multiple publications, or someone is coordinating a media campaign to discredit your ownership claims. The pattern suggested sophisticated media manipulation, rather than spontaneous family concern. Someone was actively working to shape public perception of my business accomplishments, using carefully placed doubt and anonymous sourcing to avoid accountability while maximizing damage. David Kim arrived at my office with a different concern entirely. Victoria, we're getting inquiries from potential competitors about our client contracts and business model. 3 companies have called this morning asking about partnership opportunities or suggesting that Meridian might be interested in acquisition discussions. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Competitors were interpreting the family drama and anonymous allegations as signs of potential instability or vulnerability at Meridian. They were circling like sharks, hoping to capitalize on any disruption to our business relationships or operational focus. Are any of our existing clients expressing concerns about contract stability? Not yet, but I've had several requests for meetings to discuss the recent developments and ensure continuity of service. They're being diplomatic, but they're clearly evaluating whether the family situation might affect our ability to deliver on commitments. The business implications were becoming clear. My family's sabotage had escalated from personal attack to potential corporate damage. Their willingness to spread doubt about my competence and legitimacy was now threatening the livelihoods of 47 employees and the stability of relationships with dozens of clients. Cancel my other appointments for today, I told David. I want to call every major client personally to address their concerns directly. And I want to schedule individual meetings with any client who requests them. They deserve to hear the facts from me rather than speculation from anonymous sources. The client calls consumed most of the afternoon. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: expressions of support for Meridian's work, questions about the family situation, requests for reassurance about business stability, and ultimate confidence in continuing the relationship based on results rather than rumors. But the cumulative effect was exhausting. I found myself repeatedly defending accomplishments that had been documented and celebrated, explaining ownership structures that were completely legitimate, and providing reassurance about capabilities that had been proven through 3 years of successful project delivery. By 4 p.m., I felt like I had been cross-examined about my entire professional life by people who had previously trusted my leadership without question. The emotional toll of justifying my success to audiences who shouldn't have needed justification was beginning to affect my ability to think clearly about strategic responses. Chloe Martinez appeared at my office door around 4:30, with coffee and the determined expression of someone prepared to provide reality therapy whether it was wanted or not. "You look terrible," she announced, settling into the chair across from my desk. "How many client calls have you made today?" 18. With 6 more scheduled for Monday morning before the press conference. "Victoria, you're letting them win. Your family wanted to force you into a defensive position where you spend all your time justifying your success instead of building on it. Mission accomplished." The observation hit like a physical blow because it was completely accurate. I had spent the entire day responding to my family's sabotage rather than pursuing Meridian's business objectives. I had allowed anonymous allegations to redirect my focus from leadership to self-defense, exactly as Brandon had probably intended. So what's the alternative? Ignore the allegations and hope they go away. Address them once comprehensively with overwhelming evidence, then refuse to discuss them further.
The press conference is the right approach, but it needs to be the final word, not the beginning of an ongoing defensive campaign. Chloe was right, but implementing her advice would require a level of confidence and strategic discipline that felt challenging after a day of repeatedly explaining why I deserved to own my own company. There's something else, Chloe continued. I've been hearing rumors about your family's response to the Business Journal article. Apparently, your mother has been calling people in her social circle to share her version of events. My stomach dropped. What kind of version? The story she's telling is that you've always been prone to exaggeration and fantasy, that the family tried to protect you from embarrassment by warning potential employers about your tendency to oversell yourself, and that you're now retaliating by making false claims about business ownership. The narrative was devastatingly effective because it reframed every piece of evidence in my favor as potential proof of the personality flaws my mother was alleging. My success became evidence of exaggeration, my documentation became evidence of elaborate fantasy, and my response to sabotage became evidence of vindictive retaliation. She's also suggesting that the inheritance from your grandmother may have been mismanaged or misappropriated, and that the family is considering legal action to protect Elena's legacy from being squandered on questionable business ventures. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. The threat was both personal and professional. Not only were they questioning my competence and honesty, but they were now suggesting potential financial impropriety involving my grandmother's estate. Helen needs to know about this immediately, I said, reaching for my phone. If they're threatening legal action involving the inheritance, we need to be prepared for escalation beyond media manipulation. Helen's response was swift and decisive. Victoria, this has moved beyond family drama into potential defamation and harassment. We need to document every communication, every allegation, and every attempt to damage your reputation or business relationships. And we need to be prepared for the possibility that they might actually file frivolous legal claims designed to create negative publicity rather than achieve legitimate legal objectives. The weekend was consumed by preparation for Monday's press conference. Helen and her team assembled comprehensive documentation of Meridian's founding growth and my role in every major decision. David compiled financial records, client testimonials, and employee statements that demonstrated the company's stability and success. I worked with Jennifer Walsh from the public relations firm to develop messaging that addressed the allegations directly while positioning me as a successful entrepreneur dealing with family sabotage rather than a questionable business owner facing legitimate scrutiny. The materials were overwhelming in their scope and detail. Bank records showing the progression from my grandmother's inheritance to Meridian's startup funding. Corporate documents establishing the timeline of ownership and decision-making authority. Client contracts demonstrating my direct involvement in major negotiations and strategic planning. Employee evaluations showing my technical contributions and leadership development. This level of documentation isn't normally necessary for a business owner to prove ownership of their own company, Helen observed as we reviewed the assembled evidence. The fact that you need to provide this much proof of your own accomplishments highlights how effectively your family has weaponized doubt against you. Sunday evening brought an unexpected development. Brandon called my personal phone at 9 p.m., his voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard since childhood, genuine distress rather than calculated manipulation. Victoria, we need to talk. This situation is spiraling beyond what anyone intended, and I think there are some serious misunderstandings that need to be cleared up before tomorrow's press conference. What misunderstandings would those be, Brandon? I never wanted this to become a public media battle. The comments to the Business Journal weren't meant to damage your business, they were meant to provide context about family concerns that people might not understand otherwise. The attempt to reframe his media manipulation as helpful context was so audacious that I almost laughed. Brandon, you gave anonymous quotes questioning my competence and suggesting I was overstating my role in my own company's success. How is that providing helpful context? Because people need to understand that this isn't just a simple story of family sabotage. There are legitimate questions about whether someone with your limited professional experience could realistically have built such a complex organization without significant assistance. There it was. The core belief that had motivated weeks of sabotage and media manipulation. Brandon genuinely couldn't accept that his younger sister had achieved something significant without help, guidance, or some form of unearned advantage. Brandon, I have a computer science degree from University of Colorado, 3 years of documented business growth, 47 employees, millions in annual revenue, and comprehensive documentation of every major business decision I've made since founding Meridian. What additional qualifications would convince you that I'm capable of owning my own company? It's not about qualifications, Victoria, it's about believability. People are going to have questions about how someone who seemed directionless just a few years ago suddenly became a successful entrepreneur. Seemed directionless to whom? To you, to mom and dad. Because you never bothered to learn what I was actually doing with my life. We tried to stay involved, but you were always secretive about your work, always evasive when we asked about your plans and goals. How were we supposed to know you were building a successful business when you never told us about it? The question revealed the fundamental disconnect that had shaped our entire relationship. Brandon had interpreted my need for independence and privacy as evidence of failure rather than evidence of success. He had assumed that my reluctance to seek his advice meant I had nothing significant to report rather than something significant to protect. I was secretive because I knew you wouldn't support it. I was evasive because every conversation about my career became an opportunity for you to suggest alternatives that aligned better with your definition of success. I kept Meridian private because I wanted to build something without having to justify every decision to people who didn't believe in my judgment. And look how that turned out. You built something impressive, but you also created a situation where legitimate family concerns look like sabotage because no one understood the full picture. Brandon was still trying to reframe deliberate sabotage as misguided concern, still attempting to make my independence the cause of his interference rather than the target of it. Brandon, tomorrow morning I'm going to present comprehensive documentation of Meridian's founding and growth. The press conference will demonstrate exactly what you and mom and dad tried to sabotage, and exactly what you're continuing to try to undermine with anonymous media quotes. After that presentation, I don't want any further contact from any of you regarding my business or my professional life. Victoria, you're making a mistake. This press conference is going to make you look defensive and vindictive. People are going to wonder why you need to prove your own competence so aggressively. People are wondering about my competence because you planted doubt with anonymous allegations. I'm not being defensive, I'm being comprehensive. There's a difference. I ended the call and turned off my phone, then spent the rest of the evening reviewing my presentation materials and preparing for what felt like the most important professional moment of my career. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of sharp October light that made Denver's skyline look like a photograph. I arrived at Meridian's offices 2 hours early, wanting time to set up the conference room and review my presentation before the media and attendees arrived. The materials were arranged across multiple tables: financial documents, corporate filings, client testimonials, employee statements, and technical specifications for major projects. Each category told part of the story of Meridian's development, but together they painted a comprehensive picture of legitimate business growth, guided by competent leadership. Helen arrived at 8:30 with her legal team, followed by Jennifer Walsh and her communications specialists. David Kim brought the final client testimonials that had arrived over the weekend, including statements from 3 major accounts specifically praising my technical expertise and strategic vision. The attendance list is impressive, Jennifer reported as she reviewed her notes. Representatives from 8 business publications, 4 potential clients who requested invitations, 6 existing clients, and 3 local entrepreneurs who asked to observe. The story has generated significant interest in the business community. At 9:45, I stood in front of the assembled group feeling a mixture of confidence and nervous energy that reminded me of my first major client presentation 3 years earlier. The difference was that this time I was presenting my own qualifications rather than Meridian's capabilities, defending my own legitimacy rather than proposing solutions to business challenges. Good morning, and thank you for attending this presentation about Meridian Technologies and the recent questions that have been raised about its ownership and development. My name is Victoria Hayes, and I am the founder, majority owner, and chief executive officer of this company. I clicked to the first slide, showing a timeline of Meridian's development from initial concept through current operations. I founded Meridian Technologies in September 2021 using capital from my maternal grandmother's estate, which provided me with the financial foundation to develop a business concept I had been researching since my junior year at University of Colorado. The company was structured through a series of holding companies and legal entities designed to protect both the business and my personal privacy during its early development phase. The presentation continued with detailed documentation of every major milestone in Meridian's growth. I walked through the technical specifications for our first major project, the client negotiations that had established our reputation in Denver's business community, the hiring decisions that had built our current team, and the strategic planning that had guided our expansion into new markets. Each section included comprehensive supporting documentation, contracts signed in my name, technical specifications written by me, financial decisions traceable to my authorization, and client relationships developed through my direct involvement. These materials demonstrate that Meridian Technologies exists because of my vision, my technical capabilities, my business planning, and my sustained leadership over 3 years of operations. The company's success reflects the contributions of talented employees working within a framework I designed and under strategic direction I provided. I paused, looking around the room at faces that showed interest, engagement, and what appeared to be genuine respect for the scope of evidence I was presenting. Recently, members of my family attempted to sabotage my professional opportunities by spreading false information about my work history and personal character. When their interference was discovered and addressed, they escalated to anonymous media statements questioning my competence and suggesting that my role in Meridian's success had been overstated. I clicked to a slide showing the timeline of sabotage attempts, from Brandon's initial emails, through the coordinated phone calls during my interview to the anonymous quotes in recent business publications. These attacks on my credibility were not motivated by legitimate business concerns or factual doubts about Meridian's operations. They represent a pattern of family interference designed to undermine my professional success because it doesn't conform to their expectations about appropriate career paths or acceptable levels of independence. The final section of the presentation addressed the business implications of the sabotage attempts and Meridian's responses to protect both employee interests and client relationships. Meridian Technologies has implemented comprehensive policies to prevent future interference with our operations by unauthorized third parties. We have also retained legal counsel to address any continued attempts to damage the company's reputation or disrupt its business relationships through false or misleading public statements. I closed the presentation with a slide showing Meridian's current projects, growth projections, and plans for expansion into new markets. The evidence speaks for itself. Meridian Technologies is a legitimate, successful, growing business built through my leadership and sustained through my continued involvement in all major decisions. The recent attacks on my credibility and competence have failed because they were based on false premises and contradicted by comprehensive documentation of actual achievements. The question and answer session lasted 40 minutes, with inquiries ranging from technical details about specific projects to strategic questions about market positioning and growth plans. Each question allowed me to demonstrate knowledge and expertise that contradicted my family's suggestions about incompetence or inflated claims. A reporter from the Denver Business Journal asked about the emotional impact of family sabotage on business operations. The personal disappointment is significant, I acknowledged. But the business impact has been minimal, because Meridian's relationships are based on performance and results rather than family approval. Our clients care about project delivery, our employees care about workplace culture, and our growth trajectory speaks to market confidence in our capabilities. A potential client asked about lessons learned from the experience of managing a company while dealing with family interference. The most important lesson is that business success requires clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional operations. Meridian has implemented policies to ensure that outside interference cannot compromise our ability to serve clients effectively or provide employees with a stable work environment. The presentation concluded with expressions of support from several attendees and requests for follow-up meetings from potential clients who were impressed by both the business documentation and the way I had handled the crisis. Helen approached me as the room began to clear, her expression showing satisfaction with how the event had proceeded. Victoria, that was exactly the right approach: comprehensive, professional, well-documented, and confident without being defensive. You've established the authoritative narrative about both your business success and your family's interference. Jennifer Walsh was equally positive about the media response. The coverage is going to be much more favorable than the initial Business Journal article. You've provided irrefutable evidence of your competence and accomplishments, which makes the anonymous family allegations look petty and unfounded. As I reviewed the business cards and contact information from attendees who wanted to explore working with Meridian, I realized that the press conference had accomplished something beyond addressing my family's sabotage. It had positioned me as a visible leader in Denver's business community, demonstrated Meridian's stability and growth potential, and established my credibility as an entrepreneur worthy of serious consideration for major projects and partnerships. The afternoon brought a steady stream of follow-up communications from attendees, media representatives, and business contacts who had heard about the presentation. 3 potential clients requested proposal meetings for significant projects. Two business publications wanted feature interviews about entrepreneurship and family business dynamics. A local entrepreneur organization invited me to speak at their monthly meeting about building successful companies while managing personal challenges. David stopped by my office around 4 p.m. with a summary of the day's business developments. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, he reported. Existing clients are expressing renewed confidence in Meridian's stability, potential clients are requesting meetings, and several competitors have withdrawn their acquisition inquiries. The press conference effectively demonstrated that family drama hasn't weakened the company, it's actually highlighted your leadership capabilities. The phone rang as David finished his update. The caller ID showed my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to Patricia Hayes's message with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. Victoria, I watched the news coverage of your presentation today, and I think we need to have a family conversation about how to move forward from this situation. Your father and I are concerned that this public conflict is damaging relationships that have taken years to build, and we'd like to discuss ways to resolve our differences privately, rather than through media statements and business presentations. Please call me when you have time to talk.
The message was carefully worded to sound conciliatory while avoiding any acknowledgement of wrongdoing or acceptance of responsibility for the sabotage that had necessitated the press conference. I deleted the voicemail without returning the call, then turned my attention to reviewing proposals for potential new projects that had emerged from the day's networking opportunities. The press conference had accomplished its strategic objectives, establishing my credibility, demonstrating Meridian's strength, and positioning the family sabotage as ineffective rather than damaging. But it had also marked a definitive end to any possibility of reconciliation with people who had chosen to attack my professional success rather than celebrate it. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I reflected on how dramatically the landscape of my life had changed over the past week. 7 days earlier, I had been Victoria Hayes, the disappointing daughter whose family didn't understand her career choices. Tonight I was Victoria Hayes, the successful entrepreneur whose family's sabotage had failed so completely that it had actually enhanced her professional reputation. The transformation felt both satisfying and sad. I had achieved the recognition and respect I had always wanted, but the cost had been the complete destruction of relationships I had spent years trying to preserve. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Saw the news coverage. You were amazing. Ready to celebrate properly now? I smiled as I typed my response, absolutely. But let's celebrate at Meridian's building. I want to toast the company's success in the space where it actually happened. An hour later, Chloe and I stood on Meridian's rooftop terrace with champagne and a view of downtown Denver sparkling in the evening light. The city stretched out below us, full of opportunities and challenges that I was finally free to pursue without the constant weight of family expectations or the fear of family sabotage. So what's next? Chloe asked as we watched the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains. I considered the question, thinking about the project proposals on my desk, the speaking invitations I had received, and the business relationships that were developing now that my role in Meridian's success was public knowledge. Next, I build the company I always envisioned without having to hide my involvement or protect anyone from the knowledge of my success. Next, I make decisions based on business strategy rather than family politics. Next, I find out what Meridian can become when its owner doesn't have to operate in secret. Chloe clinked her glass against mine. To Victoria Hayes, successful entrepreneur, skilled crisis manager, and someone who finally stopped apologizing for being exactly as capable as she always knew she was. As we stood there watching the lights come on across Denver's business district, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. The press conference hadn't been about defeating my family, it had been about finally fully claiming the success I had earned and the identity I had built. The sabotage had failed not because I had outmaneuvered my family, but because they had fundamentally misunderstood what they were attacking. They had tried to destroy a career that didn't exist, interfere with opportunities that were already mine, and undermine accomplishments that were too well documented to discredit. In the end, their greatest mistake had been assuming I needed their approval to succeed, when what I actually needed was the freedom to succeed without their interference. The city lights below us represented thousands of businesses, millions of professional relationships, and countless opportunities that existed independently of family approval or disapproval. Tomorrow I would return to the work of building Meridian into everything I had envisioned, secure in the knowledge that my success belonged entirely to me. 6 months after the press conference, I stood in the penthouse office that had become my permanent workspace, watching snow fall softly over downtown Denver while reviewing quarterly reports that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Meridian Technologies had grown from 47 employees to 83, expanded into 3 new markets, and secured contracts with clients who had specifically requested to work with the company they'd read about in business publications nationwide. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The weeks following the media presentation had brought both opportunities and challenges as Denver's business community absorbed the story of family sabotage and corporate success. Some potential partners had been inspired by my resilience and strategic thinking. Others had been concerned about ongoing family drama affecting business stability. But as months passed without further interference from my parents or Brandon, confidence in Meridian's leadership and future prospects had solidified into genuine market enthusiasm. The morning brought my usual routine of reviewing overnight communications from clients across different time zones, but today's messages included something unexpected. An email from Elena Hayes Martinez, my grandmother's sister whom I hadn't spoken to since the funeral 4 years earlier. Victoria, the message began. I hope this finds you well. I've been following the news about your business success and the challenges with your immediate family. I wanted you to know that Elena would have been incredibly proud of what you've accomplished with the inheritance she left you. She always believed you had the vision and determination to build something meaningful, and Meridian Technologies represents exactly the kind of legacy she hoped her gift would make possible. I'm writing because I think it's time you knew some things about your grandmother's intentions that might help you understand why she structured her will the way she did. Would you be available for lunch sometime this week? I have stories to share that I think you'll find both surprising and validating. The message stirred emotions I had carefully managed since the crisis with my family began. Elena Hayes had been the one person who consistently encouraged my entrepreneurial interests, who asked detailed questions about my technical projects, who treated my business ideas as legitimate possibilities rather than impractical fantasies. Her inheritance had made Meridian possible, but I had never fully understood why she had chosen to support my ventures rather than Brandon's more conventional career path. I called Elena Martinez immediately, arranging to meet her for lunch at a quiet restaurant in Cherry Creek where we could talk without interruption. The anticipation of learning more about my grandmother's perspective on family dynamics and business success felt both exciting and slightly overwhelming. The restaurant was nearly empty when I arrived, the lunch rush having ended while most of downtown Denver remained focused on afternoon meetings and project deadlines. Elena Martinez looked remarkably similar to her sister, with the same sharp intelligence in her eyes and the same elegant bearing that had always made my grandmother seem wise beyond her years. Victoria, she said, rising to embrace me warmly. You look exactly like Elena did at your age. Confident, purposeful, ready to take on the world regardless of who approves or disapproves. We settled into a corner booth with good natural light and minimal distractions, ordering coffee and sandwiches while catching up on the basic details of our lives since Elena's funeral. I've been wanting to have this conversation for months, Elena Martinez admitted, but I wanted to wait until the situation with your parents had stabilized. Elena left me some letters that she intended for you to receive if certain circumstances arose. The family conflict over your business success qualifies as exactly the circumstances she was concerned about. She reached into her purse and withdrew a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind Elena had always used for important correspondence. She wrote this 2 years before she passed away, after Brandon graduated from college and started his financial planning career. She was already concerned about family dynamics and wanted to ensure you understood her reasoning if her will became a source of conflict. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding several pages of Elena's precise script. The letter began with expressions of love and pride that brought tears to my eyes, but it quickly moved to more substantive observations about family patterns and expectations. My dear Victoria, the letter read, if you are reading this, it means that my decision to support your entrepreneurial aspirations has become a source of family tension. I want you to understand that this outcome was not only anticipated but considered necessary for your personal and professional development. Your parents and Brandon are good people, but they have never understood that success can take many forms, and that your form of success requires independence from their guidance and approval. The letter continued with detailed observations about family dynamics that Elena had noticed during holiday gatherings and family events. She described conversations where my parents had dismissed my technical interests as phases, meetings where Brandon had assumed I would eventually follow his path toward conventional professional achievement, and moments when my independence had been interpreted as failure rather than strength. I have watched you develop ideas and capabilities that your immediate family doesn't recognize or value. Your technical skills, your strategic thinking, your ability to see opportunities that others miss, these are gifts that will serve you well in entrepreneurial ventures. But only if you have the freedom to develop them without constant second-guessing from people who don't understand their potential. The most revealing section addressed the inheritance structure directly. Elena had deliberately designed the financial gift to be inaccessible to my parents and difficult for them to influence or control. She had also included provisions that would make it challenging for Brandon to claim any portion of the inheritance if he attempted to interfere with my use of the funds. The money I'm leaving you is not just a gift, it's a tool for independence. Use it to build something that reflects your vision rather than their expectations. And if they respond to your success with sabotage rather than celebration, know that this reaction was predicted and prepared for. The final paragraph contained advice that felt prophetic given recent events. Your family may attempt to undermine your accomplishments if they don't align with their definition of appropriate success. When this happens, remember that their doubt reflects their limitations, not yours. The business world will judge you based on results, not family approval. Trust your instincts, document your achievements, and never apologize for succeeding on your own terms. I finished reading the letter with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Elena had understood family dynamics that I was only beginning to recognize, and she had structured her gift to protect me from interference that she knew would eventually come. She spent months planning how to phrase that letter, Elena Martinez explained. She wanted to support your independence without creating unnecessary family conflict, but she also wanted to ensure you had the resources and encouragement to pursue your goals regardless of family reactions. Did she know my parents would try to sabotage my career? She knew they would struggle to accept success that didn't follow Brandon's pattern. She hoped they would eventually come around, but she wanted to make sure their initial resistance wouldn't derail your opportunities. We spent the rest of lunch discussing Elena's perspective on business leadership, her observations about entrepreneurial success, and her belief that I had the capabilities to build something significant if given the chance to develop them independently. There's something else, Elena Martinez said as we prepared to leave the restaurant. Your grandmother left instructions for a trust fund that becomes available to you on your 30th birthday. The fund contains additional resources specifically designated for expanding whatever business ventures you've established by that time. She wanted to ensure that early success would be supported with capital for growth and development. The revelation was stunning. Not only had Elena provided the initial funding for Meridian, but she had also planned for its future expansion in ways that demonstrated remarkable confidence in my long-term business prospects. How much additional funding? Enough to double your current operations or expand into national markets, depending on your strategic priorities. Elena believed that successful entrepreneurs need multiple waves of investment to reach their full potential. I drove back to Meridian's offices with a profound sense of connection to my grandmother's vision and values. The inheritance hadn't been a simple financial gift, it had been a comprehensive support system designed to enable entrepreneurial success despite family resistance or industry skepticism. The afternoon brought a scheduled meeting with potential investors who had been following Meridian's growth since the press conference. The group included representatives from 2 venture capital firms and a private equity company specialized in supporting women-owned technology businesses. Victoria, said Catherine Walsh from Denver Venture Partners, we've been impressed not only with Meridian's financial performance but also with your leadership during what we understand was a challenging period of family interference. The way you handled that crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and crisis management that we look for in portfolio companies. The meeting progressed through detailed discussions of Meridian's growth trajectory, market positioning, and expansion opportunities. The investors were particularly interested in our client retention rates, employee satisfaction metrics, and the technical innovations that had distinguished our services from competitors.
What sets Meridian apart, I explained, is our focus on understanding client challenges rather than simply delivering technical solutions. We approach every project as a partnership where success is measured by business outcomes rather than technical specifications. The approach had proven effective across multiple industries and client sizes. Our retention rate exceeded 90%. Our employee satisfaction scores ranked in the top 5% for technology companies, and our project delivery timeline consistently beat industry standards. The question we're exploring, said Michael Chen from Rocky Mountain Growth Capital, is whether you're interested in investment capital to accelerate expansion or whether you prefer to maintain complete ownership and grow at a more controlled pace. It was a fundamental strategic decision that would shape Meridian's future direction. Investment capital would enable rapid expansion into new markets and service areas, but it would also introduce external oversight and pressure for aggressive growth targets. Maintaining independent ownership would preserve complete strategic control but limit expansion opportunities. I'm open to investment partnerships that align with Meridian's values and long-term vision, I replied. But any investment relationship would need to respect the company culture and business philosophy that have driven our success so far. The investors expressed genuine interest in exploring partnership opportunities that would support expansion while preserving the organizational characteristics that had made Meridian attractive in the first place. As the meeting concluded with agreements to continue discussions and conduct due diligence reviews, I reflected on how dramatically my relationship with the business community had evolved since the family crisis began. 6 months earlier, I had been an anonymous company owner operating through intermediaries. Today I was fielding investment proposals from established firms that specifically wanted to work with me because of my demonstrated leadership and strategic capabilities. The transformation had required navigating public scrutiny, media attention, and family conflict that I never could have anticipated. But it had also revealed strengths and opportunities that might have remained hidden if I had continued operating in secret. That evening, Chloe Martinez joined me for dinner at my apartment, bringing champagne to celebrate the investor meetings and updates about her own career developments. Her nonprofit had received a major grant that would allow expansion of their community programs, largely based on recommendations from business leaders who had been impressed by her strategic planning and execution skills. "We're both having breakthrough years," she observed as we settled onto my couch with wine and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. "It's like everything we've been working toward finally aligned with the right opportunities and timing. I think the breakthrough was learning to stop hiding our accomplishments from people who didn't appreciate them anyway. For years I was protecting my family from knowledge of my success. Once I stopped doing that, everything else became much clearer." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "The family situation was horrible while it was happening, but it forced you to establish boundaries that you probably should have set years earlier." The observation was accurate but still painful to acknowledge. The crisis with my parents and brand had been devastating personally, but it had also been liberating professionally. I was no longer managing dual identities or limiting my business development to protect family feelings. "Have you heard anything from them recently?" "Nothing direct. Helen Rodriguez says her office occasionally receives calls from attorneys asking questions about Meridian's corporate structure, but they stop when they're told that any inquiries need to be submitted in writing with specific legal basis. I think they're still looking for ways to challenge my ownership or find evidence of impropriety, but they're not finding anything because there's nothing to find." The legal harassment had become sporadic and ineffective, more nuisance than threat. My family had apparently realized that their allegations about my competence and legitimacy were contradicted by comprehensive documentation and ongoing business success. "Do you miss them?" It was a question I had been avoiding for months, but Chloe's direct approach forced me to consider it honestly. "I miss the family I thought I had before I realized how conditional their support actually was. I miss the idea of people who would celebrate my success rather than try to undermine it. But the actual relationships we had, the dynamic where my accomplishments were either ignored or attributed to luck and inheritance. I don't miss that at all." The answer felt both sad and liberating. Acknowledging that the family relationships I had been trying to preserve were already damaged beyond repair freed me to focus on building new connections based on mutual respect and genuine support. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Victoria, this is Brandon. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I wanted you to know that I've been following Meridian's success and I'm genuinely impressed by what you've built. I realize now that my concerns about your capabilities were completely unfounded, and I'm sorry for the damage I caused to your reputation and your business. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was about everything. I showed the message to Chloe, who read it with a skeptical expression. Interesting timing, she observed. Right after you meet with major investors and your company gets featured in 3 business publications this month. You think he's trying to position himself for some kind of reconciliation now that my success is undeniable. I think he's realizing that his strategy of undermining you was not only morally wrong but also strategically stupid. Successful entrepreneurs often become valuable family connections, and he burned that bridge pretty thoroughly. I considered responding to Brandon's message, but ultimately decided that acknowledgement would only invite further communication that I wasn't ready for. The damage he had caused extended beyond personal hurt to professional interference that had threatened employee livelihoods and client relationships. An apology text didn't address the scope of harm or demonstrate meaningful understanding of its implications. Instead, I deleted the message and returned my attention to planning Meridian's expansion into markets that would challenge our capabilities and reward our growth, with opportunities we had only imagined 6 months earlier. The following week brought the official announcement of Meridian's partnership with Rocky Mountain Growth Capital, a strategic investment that would fund expansion into 3 new cities while preserving my majority ownership and operational control. The announcement generated significant business press coverage, including a feature interview with Colorado Business Magazine about women-owned technology companies and the unique challenges of building successful enterprises while managing family resistance. The most important lesson, I told the interviewer, is that business success requires clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional operations. Family approval is nice to have, but it's not necessary for building a company that serves clients effectively and provides employees with meaningful career opportunities. The interview included questions about the family sabotage incident, but I addressed them briefly and moved the conversation toward Meridian's current projects and future plans. The crisis had become a footnote in a larger story about entrepreneurial success and strategic growth. That afternoon, I received a call from Janet Morrison with news that captured everything I hoped Meridian could become. Victoria, I wanted to let you know that 3 of our former employees have left to start their own companies, and all of them have asked to maintain consulting relationships with Meridian. They're saying that their experience here gave them the skills and confidence to pursue their own entrepreneurial goals. The development was exactly what I had envisioned when I designed Meridian's culture and career development programs. Rather than losing talented employees to competitors, we were becoming a launching pad for new businesses that remain connected to our network and values. They're also all women, Janet continued, and they're all crediting their time at Meridian with teaching them that business ownership was a realistic possibility rather than an impossible dream. The impact extended beyond individual career development to broader representation in Denver's entrepreneurial community. Meridian was becoming known as a company that not only delivered excellent technical services, but also developed business leaders who went on to create their own successful enterprises. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the trajectory that had brought me from anonymous company owner to visible business leader, to mentor for emerging entrepreneurs. The family crisis that had threatened to destroy my professional reputation had ultimately accelerated my development into exactly the kind of leader I had always hoped to become. The evening brought another significant development. Elena Martinez called to invite me to a family gathering that she was hosting for relatives who had supported my business success from the beginning. The guest list included cousins, aunts, and family friends who had followed Meridian's growth with pride and excitement rather than suspicion and sabotage. Elena always said that families are like businesses, Elena Martinez explained. Sometimes you have to work with the people who share your values and vision, even if they're not the ones you expected to be your closest allies. The gathering was scheduled for the following weekend at Elena Martinez's home in Boulder, with an agenda that included celebration of Meridian's success, discussion of Elena's business philosophy, and sharing of stories about entrepreneurial ventures within our extended family network. The invitation represented something I hadn't realized I was missing: family connection based on mutual respect and genuine support, rather than conditional approval and constant criticism. These relatives had watched my business development with interest and encouragement, understanding that success could take many forms and celebrating achievements that aligned with my strengths and interests. Saturday afternoon found me in Elena Martinez's living room, surrounded by relatives I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral, sharing details about Meridian's growth and listening to stories about other family members who had built successful careers outside traditional expectations. My cousin Maria described her development of a successful consulting practice that served nonprofit organizations. My uncle David talked about his transition from corporate employment to independent business ownership in his 50s. Elena Martinez herself had built a successful real estate investment portfolio while raising 3 children and managing a household. The pattern in our family, Elena Martinez observed, is that the most successful ventures happen when people follow their own instincts rather than conventional advice. Elena recognized that pattern in you, which is why she structured her gift to support independence rather than conformity. The conversation continued through dinner and into the evening, covering topics ranging from strategic planning and risk management to work-life balance and long-term vision development. These relatives understood business challenges and entrepreneurial decision-making in ways that my immediate family never had. The difference, my cousin Maria explained, is that we've all had to figure out how to succeed on our own terms rather than following predetermined paths. We understand that building something meaningful requires independence, persistence, and willingness to make decisions that other people might not understand or support. As the evening concluded with exchanges of contact information and commitments to maintain regular communication, I realized that the family crisis had revealed connections I hadn't known existed, while clarifying relationships that had never been as supportive as I had hoped. Driving back to Denver through the foothills, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond business success or family reconciliation. The events of the past 6 months had forced me to examine every aspect of my life and relationships, discarding what didn't serve my goals while strengthening what aligned with my values and vision. Meridian Technologies had grown from a secret project designed to avoid family interference into a visible symbol of entrepreneurial success that inspired other women to pursue their own business ventures. The company culture had evolved from careful anonymity to transparent leadership that attracted both talented employees and strategic investors. My personal life had been transformed from careful management of family expectations to authentic relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. The relatives who celebrated my success understood business ownership in ways that enabled meaningful conversation and genuine support. The professional recognition had expanded from anonymous operational success to visible industry leadership that opened doors to speaking opportunities, consulting relationships, and mentorship roles that leveraged my experience to benefit other emerging entrepreneurs. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I reflected on the letter from my grandmother that had provided such crucial context for recent events. Elena Hayes had anticipated family resistance and prepared me for independence, but she had also believed that my success would ultimately demonstrate the wisdom of following my own path rather than conventional expectations. The prediction had proven accurate in ways that exceeded even her optimistic projections. Meridian's success had validated my technical capabilities, strategic judgment, and leadership potential. The family crisis had revealed strength and resilience that I hadn't known I possessed.
The business community recognition had created opportunities for growth and impact that continued expanding with each new project and partnership. Most importantly, the experience had taught me that family approval, while desirable, was not necessary for professional success or personal fulfillment. The people who mattered most were those who supported my goals and celebrated my achievements, regardless of whether they shared my DNA or my last name. The following Monday brought an email that captured everything I hoped the future would hold. A former Meridian employee who had started her own consulting firm wrote to thank me for the business foundation that had made her entrepreneurial venture possible. Victoria, her message read, "I wanted you to know that the client I'm presenting to this afternoon specifically requested to work with me because they heard about my experience at Meridian and the business skills I developed under your leadership. Your investment in employee development is creating ripple effects throughout Denver's business community, and I'm grateful to be part of that legacy." As I prepared for another day of strategic planning, client meetings, and team development, I smiled at the realization that success had taken exactly the form Elena Hayes had envisioned: meaningful work that created value for clients, opportunities for employees, and inspiration for other entrepreneurs who were ready to build something significant on their own terms. The family that had tried to sabotage my career no longer had any power over my professional trajectory. The company I had built in secret was now a visible symbol of entrepreneurial achievement. The future stretched ahead with possibilities limited only by my vision and determination, exactly as my grandmother had hoped when she provided the foundation for everything that followed. I had spent years trying to balance family expectations with personal ambitions, protecting their comfort while pursuing my goals. The crisis had forced me to choose between their approval and my success, and I had chosen success without apology or regret. Now, surrounded by employees who respected my leadership, clients who valued my expertise, and family members who celebrated my achievements, I finally understood what Elena Hayes had tried to teach me: the right people will always support your success, and the wrong people will reveal themselves by trying to undermine it. The morning brought new challenges, new opportunities, and new decisions that would shape Meridian's continued growth. But they also brought the confidence that comes from having survived the worst possible family betrayal and emerged stronger, more successful, and more authentically myself than ever before. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.